And this, it means sort of, we go through life and it feels like that there's something other than us, or something is driving us to do things, or everyone else, and it doesn't feel like it's clear, it's a direction that we take, but something, I don't know, sometimes chaotic, sometimes it's going somewhere where we don't know it's taking us. And we know we want to do something, it doesn't work, and everyone else is like this. So the question is, in a way, what is driving all of this? What's driving a tree to grow? What's driving a plant to come up? What's driving the sun to come, I don't know, rise and set? What's driving this whole world to be what it is? And because there's always change and everything is happening, and it seems like as if we grow up and we think, we're this separate entity and we can control certain things, and we can, for instance, like, when we come to something very close to us, which is thoughts. So we think there's like, 70 or 100,000 thoughts every day. And if it was true that we were the thinker, we were like separate, and then there were thoughts, we would produce thoughts, it would be obvious that we could just think whatever we want, because we were before thoughts and we would produce them. Thoughts come after us, and so we can just go to like a baker could produce bread every day. He knows, of course he has to pay attention to the dough, to the wheat he uses and everything, but he can control the shape and what he does more or less, right? But in the right direction. And if it was the same with us, we could, for instance, control thoughts. But if and now we come back, to our experience, if we use our experience and observe thoughts, then we quickly come to realize that they just come and go, but there's nobody before thoughts. Usually what we think, there's us before, like in time, and then thoughts are coming afterwards. But if you observe what's actually happening, it's more like thoughts are happening, and then another thought is coming and claiming, hey, I just had this thought. It's always coming after, not before, and that's one of the biggest confusions, I think. And I give one example, what he was also mentioning earlier. I think that not summarizes, but points exactly to this other directedness that we spoke before. So there's a family of mushrooms called cordyceps in nature. They really exist. And how they reproduce, the only way for them to reproduce is that they have spores. So they spit out spores, and through the wind they distribute. And that's the only way for them to reproduce, is that those spores, they hijack an ant, like a little ant. Mm-hmm. They hijack the ant, and then they break into the brain of the ant. And what they do is they tell the ant, so they hijack the brain, and then they tell the ant where it should go. Yeah, so it's basically to the next forest where the other mushrooms are. And so basically what happens is, it hijacks the brain, it tells the ant. If you ask the ant in that moment, hey, where are you going? Why are you going into that forest? It would say, well, I have very important business to do there. Because, it would make up some reason, right? It would say, yeah, because I have a business, I have a friend there, he lives there, and I have to go there. But it doesn't realize, that ant, that this has been hijacked, the brain, and it's other directed from something else, and it took it over. So then what happens when the ant reaches the other mushrooms, the cordyceps, then the spore kills the ant, and out of the ant grows another mushroom. So that's what's happening in nature every day, So the point here is, like, if we are the ant, yeah, that's the comparison. We are the ant, and in a way we are being hijacked by, it could be anything. It can be thoughts, it can be feelings, it can be misidentifications or anything. And what we do is, for instance, we identify with thoughts or with a separate entity, and then what happens in life, everything that happens to this entity or thoughts that we don't have any control of, we have regrets, we feel guilty for doing things, we have fears, what's happening in the future, but we don't have anything to do with that. And that's the craziness in this life, what we do every day. We spend so much energy in in like, you know, be feeling responsible for things that we don't have anything to do with. And as I said, you know, you don't have to believe what I'm saying, but if you just observe thoughts or feelings, then they just come and go like clouds in the sky, you know. I like that picture. Like, when we take this comparison of clouds in the sky, there are clouds, like thoughts is a cloud, feeling is a cloud, I don't know, events happening are clouds, they just come and go. Sometimes it's a beautiful sky, sometimes the clouds are thunderstorms, sometimes they're nice clouds, but they're always clouds that come and go. But what we are is not a cloud, but it's this blue sky that never changes, and no thought or feeling or event or hurt or whatever has ever touched the sky. So the cloud never touches the sky. You know, no matter how strong the thunderstorm is, no matter how dark the cloud is, it will never touch the sky. And that's what, you know, from my experience and also from your experience, if you inquire into it, you will also see that nothing can ever touch you. And that's you know, that's something that maybe you can entertain when I talk about it, but what I'm saying is I think we can all experience that in our own experience. And so my point here is that, you know, this other directedness that we experience every day, and like it causes a way of suffering because we are identified with it, not because it's happening, and I think that's also important, not because it's happening, but because we're identifying with it. So for instance, I mean, like, look, like this is like a daily thing. Let's say you're sitting somewhere and you have a weird thought. Like, we all have kind of weird thoughts sometimes, you know, where we think, where is this coming from? And then we wouldn't dare to express that thought, because then even inside we would feel, oh, I have weird thoughts, you know, I shouldn't express that. And you take responsibility for it and think that's you. But the point is to see maybe it's not you, maybe, because that's very important, you know, like you shouldn't listen to what I say, you should listen, but you shouldn't believe what I say, because if you just start observing what's happening, then you'll see. For another example is our body functions, you know, so the body functions, and if we were responsible or in control of our body functions, then if I was in control of my body functions, I would die after 2 minutes. Why? Because I would forget to beat the heart, because I was just thinking about something else, or I wouldn't digest the pizza from last night, or I forgot to split cells, or, you know, there's so many functions, it's like a mystery. And we sort of think, yeah, it's our body, we don't think that we're in control, but somehow we think, you know, that's us and we're responsible. And I don't know if we hurt ourselves, you know, I don't know if we sprain our ankles or whatever, we think, you know, we hurt ourselves. That's sort of the way, I hurt myself, you know. It sounds as if you hit yourself with a hammer and say, oh, I hurt myself. So we take a lot of responsibility for things that we actually don't do, and we're so busy every day defending, trying to position ourselves, our self-image, you know, we have a self-image and we want to defend our self-image towards others and say, hey, we're actually good, we're nice, and so on. And that's what you observe a lot with people, you know. They talk about how great they are, what they achieve and everything, and try to hide the bad, the negative things, the supposedly negative things. But the point is that none of us has anything to do with this. And that's the, you know, that's the good news, is that, and that's I think also an important message, is that there's nothing, like, you know, what we're talking about here, the nature that we are is already there. It's not like we are bad now, we're not fulfilled, and then we have to get fulfilled, you know, that's not it at all. It's the opposite. It's like everything is there already, and we don't have to do anything to be what we already are, you know, on this level. And that's the good news. So when we talk about other directedness, like, you know, and there's other, like, we can also go slowly on this, but other directedness means, for instance, also there are certain conditionings that we have. You know, we grow up with certain parents, with in a culture, under a religion, what you said, and this has a strong effect on how we think, how we perceive reality, how we perceive ourselves. And that has a huge factor. Even language has a very strong factor on us, and many other things, right? So basically, like even when we speak, you know, the language you learn is also a conditioning, very strictly speaking. So what happens is that we're very conditioned. That's also driving us, you know, like, yeah, that's driving our preferences. Like if we grow up, I don't know, in India and the weather's hot all the time, and we move to Germany, then, you know, we maybe don't like the cold weather, and we don't like the food because it's only salt and pepper, and in India it's a lot of spices. So these are like preferences that we also then say, oh, I like more spicy food and not so much the salt and pepper food. So it's like preferences that also in a way condition us or control us. Then there's things like belief systems, you know, like I don't know, for some reason we believe that, I don't know, it's not okay to do certain things. Like let's say it's not okay to eat pork, yeah? Some people think it's like, you know, in Islamic countries people think it's not okay to eat pork. In other countries, in Hindu, people say you're not allowed to eat beef. Then there's some people who believe in vegetarianism. They think it's not okay to eat any meat. And then who is to decide, you know? And we all have those conditionings. There's no right and wrong in a way, but from a certain perspective it feels as if it's right and wrong and it's about life and death. But these are all conditionings that are driven, and you know, many times we cannot choose those conditionings because they come, or belief systems, you know. Let's say we eat some, I don't know, salad that when we were young, a certain kind of vegetable, and then we have a very bad experience, and then we never want to touch it again. So these are all things that condition us, or belief systems, as I said. Like, and the thing is, there are ways to get rid of belief systems. There are ways to be getting unconditioned, but the point here is, you know, that would be sort of self-improvement, getting better as you know, as this body, as this mind. But the point here, what we're talking about, is not self-improvement, but it's about, you know, understanding that we are not that conditioning in the first place. And that's for me freedom, you know. Freedom for me would not be, oh, I get less conditioned, I get more tolerant for this, and I grow and I grow and grow. That's in a way nice for this body-mind, and you become more open-minded. But what I'm talking about here is, like, you know, in a way, true freedom, which means whether you're conditioned or not, you are not that conditioning. You know, it's very hard to grasp for us sometimes, but that's for me the true freedom. And then, like, one of the biggest conditionings, or like, you know, we grow up, like, for instance, identifying, and I always come back to thoughts, but also like to think about, you know, that we take ourselves as this body-mind. Like for us, like we cannot even think about that it's not possible that we are not this body or not this mind. It sounds crazy because when I speak about this, it comes from a body, you know, a body sort of saying, hey, I'm not this body, or like thoughts saying, hey, I'm not these thoughts. It sounds crazy, but it's, as I said, if you just look at your own experience, then you maybe see, because like, you know, the word I, right? People say I, and it's a also very powerful word in general. Like in all languages there's an I, and this I, it's not like this I usually, like, you know, there's two ways where you can refer that to. You can refer this I to this body-mind, or to thoughts. I the body, I the mind, and I am doing this, so I'm the doer of my actions. Or this I can also go through, and you see it as I, for instance, you know, I mean, there's different words for it, but let's say I awareness. So what I'm pointing here towards is that maybe we can entertain the possibility that maybe we're not I, the body Benjamin, and I'm doing this, I'm writing, I'm talking, but it's more maybe I, that which is aware of this body-mind, you know. So because I was talking about this someone, because if you look at, for instance, if you look at the thought, you know, can a thought perceive something? Can a thought hear? Can a thought feel? Can a thought listen? If you ask me, no, because the thought itself is an object. So then, and that's a very interesting thing, no? Because we sort of think, yeah, a thought, me as a thought, because we identify very strongly with thoughts. I as a thought, I can feel, I can hear, but that's what is hearing and is listening and that is tasting and touching is not a thought, obviously. So it's a sensing, right? But then if you go even a step further, you know, if you look at the body, for instance, we usually believe that that the body is the one that senses, that hears, that tastes, and all that stuff. But actually, if you ask me, it's not actually doing that, because, for instance, if you look at your eyes, you know, the eyes are just sort of helping the process of seeing, but the seeing is not happening from the eyes, like as the seeing cannot see the eyes in a way, you know, the eyes cannot see the eyes themselves. So it's like, it's basically that we can even perceive the body. I think, I don't know if Rumi said that, but there are many people who say what can be perceived is not the perceiver. So whatever can be perceived, I can perceive a table, I can perceive this arm, I can perceive, I don't know, this voice and everything. And they say that which is perceiving is not the perceiver. So meaning there must be something else, another quality, another attribute, or something, or maybe nothing, that basically is aware, or that basically perceives this object. Because, you know, that's the funny thing. We usually believe that me as a separate entity, this body is the subject, and everything else is object. So I can see this book, I can see you, I can see you, I can see this table, I can hear, and so on. And we think this is the subject and everything else is around, and that's separate. And you know, being separate means we like, meaning, yeah, being separate means suffering, because we sort of long to be integrated, to be one with everything. So that's how we walk around. And then, like, you know, it's just, yeah, it's I don't know, it's just a change of perspective in a way, but it just draws you back, and you go a step back and say, hey, you know, this, what you usually think you are, is just another object. And you can go on and on, right? So on this object level, you can always say, this is an object, this is an object. So whatever you say you can perceive, you're not. That means everything here, that already falls off the table, because we're not that. But we usually, the funny thing is, we usually forget, you know, we usually look from here and we see as the object here, but we forget this one. And that's the funny part, because that causes all the suffering, because what we are, and that's why we also believe, you know, this, but we are born as this body, we die as this body, but what we are, like, we could not be perceiving this if we were the body. The body cannot perceive itself. It cannot. It's like, imagine you have a tongue made of salt, and I put salt on your tongue. Would you taste anything? You know, there's no taste. Then the same cannot perceive the same. So, and that's a very interesting thing. So if you really take that in a way sincerely, then it's not possible that we are the bodies, because we can perceive the bodies. I'm not the table, I can perceive the table. I'm not the thoughts, but I can hear the thoughts. So there's something driving all of this, and something aware of all of this, and I think that's important. You know, it's like, and this awareness is a very interesting thing, because it sort of doesn't have any attributes, it doesn't have any qualities, because it's, in a way, it's empty, because if this is an object, it has to be a non-object. If you know, if it's not, it's empty, but it's the same time it's also full, because it gives you that feeling of fulfillment, and it's, yeah, it's there, it's here now, and yeah, this awareness, like, for instance, like, you know, every object needs some kind of background to be there. For instance, when you read a book, you need to have the paper. You cannot see any letters or words if you don't have the paper in the background. Or for instance, you know, there's this a lot of in the non-duality here. There's this analogy with a screen. So for instance, imagine you're watching a movie, and usually people are only paying attention to the objects in the movie, so which is the film. You know, let's say there's a screen, you watch a film, and everyone pays attention to the film, so to the moving images and everything, and the sound, but nobody ever pays attention to the screen. But without the screen, there's no movie. So, and you know, and that's, I think, a very strong point, and that's the same with here, with awareness. Like, there would not be any objects if there was no awareness, and we are that awareness. And I want to give you another example. So for instance, let's look at this table here. There's a table, and there's like a 3 or 4 step process. So usually we think they're objects, right? There's a table, and we think, usually our assumption is there's a table independent of, like it has an independent reality. There's a table, it exists independently from everything else. So, and now when we look at what we know about the table, what's the knowledge of this table, and then if I ask you, how do you know there's a table, you would say, yeah, I can touch it, I can see it, I can maybe smell the wood, and then all you know about this table is basically the sensing of it. So the smelling, the touching, the seeing. That's all you know about a table. If you don't have those senses, you would not know of this table. Yeah, that means, and now it's interesting, meaning there's a perception of the table, but actually, if you look closely, if I ask you, does this table exist in your experience? It's not a theoretical thing. Does the table exist in your experience outside of your perceptions? Like, meaning, if you didn't see, if you didn't smell, if you didn't touch, then would that table be there in your experience? That's a very important concept in a way. Is it your first-hand experience, or is it something that you hear, like from hearsay? So if I asked you, does this table exist outside of your perception, what would you say? Like, it would not be my experience, I would not be aware, or I would not know about the table. So that means, if that's your experience as well, it would mean that the table doesn't have an existence on its own, but it depends on the perceiving of it. So meaning, if I ask them, what's the substance, what's the table made of, then you could say it's perceiving. So it only exists in your perception. That means it doesn't have its own reality. So that's like already okay. That means the table needs perception to exist. It cannot exist outside of perception. That's the first step. The second step is if you ask then, okay, how do you know that you're hearing, that you're seeing, that you're smelling, that you're tasting, that you're touching? How do you know that? And then here, the step back would be, well, you're aware of it. I'm aware that I'm feeling, I'm aware, because there's something that's aware of this. I am aware. And then, again, and then you can go a step back, so how do you know the perceiving and so on? It's this being aware. And then, can you be, can the perceiving exist without being aware? Have you ever, touched something without being aware? It has never happened in my experience. If I touch this table, then I'm aware of touching this table. So the perception is dependent on awareness. So that means there's no perception independent of awareness, because I have never touched something without being aware. That goes hand in hand, right? So then I could even say, if I asked what's the substance or the nature of perceiving, of seeing, it's awareness. So then if I asked, what's that made of? What's that stuff made of? It's awareness. So you could actually say, in that way, we're sort of taking this apart and say, there's only awareness. That we only know awareness. We don't know existence of a separate table, we don't know existence of a separate person, we only know awareness. And that means everything is made out of awareness. It's sort of, like taking this whole thing apart, basically saying, we are awareness, and there's maybe objects, but we take it apart. And then, they have this saying in Zen Buddhism, I think. Have you heard the saying where they say, first there are the mountains, then there are no mountains, and then there are the mountains again. And there's probably in other cultures, there's different things. And that means exactly that. First we think, let's say, oh yeah, there's a table, there's this body, there's thoughts, that's like this. Then what we do is we take this apart, we say, look, we separate awareness from the object world. It's like this. And then when you have seen that clearly, that maybe this table doesn't exist, then you come back, and then it's also like, you know, what Rumi and everyone says, then you come back and basically the world is not the same anymore, because then what happens is, but you integrate again, then there is a table again, there's everything again, but it's completely different because you're not identified with this anymore, but you're aware that everything is light, and you know, it's more impersonal. So basically, yeah, that's basically coming back to what I said earlier. So instead of being inner directed, or have a clear sense of direction, we are outer directed. So that means if we are aware of all those drivers, you know, that's going on currently with the conditioning, belief systems, false identifications, then it feels like we're just running around and we have no clue what's happening. And the more we become aware of, you know, those conditionings, those belief systems, and we can see that and entertain, but really see it for ourselves in the moment it happens, that maybe we are not that, you know, gives us a sense of clear direction in a way. Maybe it's not even a direction, but maybe it's just some clarity and lightheartedness in our everyday life, because we're then not driven anymore by all this noise. And I think what's also very important in this is because nothing ever changes regarding that, but what may change or may seemingly change is that we put our attention on things, you know, like, yeah, we put our attention on more the lighthearted things, and everything that happens is more lighthearted, and we don't seek so much, we don't hope so much, we don't live in the past, we don't in the future, but we just go more with the flow, but not with the flow of the noise, but more with the flow that's, you know, has some kind of clarity and that's clear. So yeah, that's basically it what I want to say. So we can just discuss if you have questions, or if you have other thoughts, we can just discuss.